Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdist Dave, and today I'm joined by Douglas Cole. How are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you, David.
From Gaming Ballistic, right? I always want to say it backwards for some reason.
Ballistic Gaming is a site and a thing. It's for
Yeah,
super high frame rate shooters and stuff, but that is not me.
yeah. I don't know why that is. I always want to reverse them. Uh, so if you want to quick, just kind of like for people that maybe aren't familiar with you, let them know what it is you do and who you are.
So, Gaming Ballistic started as a blog in very late 2012, and eventually became a game company, which publishes tabletop role playing games. I started in the OSR and fifth edition space a little bit with Dungeon Grappling, Dragon Heresy, and Lost Hall of Tyr. But after I had those projects under my belt, I approached Steve Jackson Games about supporting the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game box set, um, and at Gen Con 50. And they said, well, ask again later. And I did. And eventually they said, yes, let's do this. And so I started publishing under license for the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game. I am the only third party publisher that is given a license for the Dungeon Fantasy role playing game. And then later on at GameholeCon, I asked Steve. So, and this was right about the time that I was doing my second Dungeon Fantasy role playing game release, The Citadel at Nordhorn, which we're not supposed to love our children differently, but I
Mm.
really loved Citadel at Nordhorn. Anyway, but in any case, I said, well, what more can I do that I'm not doing now? And Steve said, well, write for or publish for the fantasy trip. And I said, okay, let me think about that because I was never a fantasy tripper, and I didn't want to do the game a disservice by sorry, I'm having cat problems, cat
No,
life.
no
Um,
worries. The internet has summoned the cat. They know. They know. Like the
yeah,
internet
they,
is
they
for
do.
cats.
Anyway, so it's like Jaws. Dun 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 dun. I need music. Um, in any case, he said right for the fantasy trip, and I was uncertain because I had never really played, and so rather than write for the fantasy trip, I went to people like David Pulver and Christopher R. Rice and J. Edward Tremlett, who had published with Steve Jackson Games before, and we have since released 10 books by them. And I recently released 4 collections of pre-built characters with some personalities, some skills, uh, decks of cards with characters on them for quick reference. And that was my immediately prior Kickstarter to the character collections. My most successful Kickstarter ever, I should add, both financially and um, in terms of its response so far. But that's kind of what I am. I right now I do a lot under license for Steve Jackson Games, and with some of my Dungeons and Dragons stuff, uh, kind of waiting in the wings for a moment for me to take some of the things that I've done already, which have art and have writing and all that stuff, and sort of back convert them to the world's most populous system.
Yeah, I find it kind of fascinating because you're now doing this full time, correct?
That is correct. I had a job at a disk drive company, and that stopped last summer.
Yeah.
And then I talked to my wife, and I said, well, maybe after after the positive results in profitability in 2019 and the dismal year that was 2020, both of which had known causes, I was like, I think that I can do this for real. And we had a deal. And she's been I got it. She's very supportive of what I'm doing. And it doesn't hurt that she has a pretty good job turning cow poop into biogas. Um, yes, for her, same different day is a literal job description.
Yeah.
Um, in any case, the we have an agreement where as long as we meet certain income targets and I can get in the household boat and row, I can do this full time.
Um, the thing that I find fascinating is the fact that you're doing it, but you're doing it as a third party publisher with one of the companies that isn't like the big company, right?
That's correct.
So that, I mean, that is actually pretty impressive in and of itself. But because it's there's a lot of games out there, and while those games themselves people are able to kind of do successfully, but to actually be a third party for one of them and do it successfully.
Yeah, and if I might indulge in a tiny bit of atypical backpatting, Steve Jackson Games partners with third-party people very reluctantly. So, in terms of, anyone can do third-party stuff with the open game license. Not everyone gets told, yeah, you can do whatever you need to within the contract boundaries for the Powered by GURPS Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game or the Fantasy Trip. But I wrote for them for a long time. I was a playtester and lead playtester on so many books for them that I stopped listing them on my credits because it was just I published so many that it was just a list, right? And
Yeah.
that stops losing meaning. But I wrote 13 or 14 articles for them in Pyramid Magazine. I published GURPS Martial Arts Technical Grappling. I've been a collaborator and an editor. Not a formal editor, but like Peter Del Orto sent me a manuscript that was over word count by 40%, and we turned it in exactly on topic. Without losing any content. And I've done that for a few other people and stuff like that. So, by the time it came around to say, okay, we're going to license this stuff to you and get a licensing cut and have a business relationship that was a little different than freelancing, I was a known quantity to them.
Nice. As always, folks, in the description, you can find links to check out Douglas Cole around the web. And you also have a Kickstarter going on right now, which you've already successfully kicked.
Yeah, no, we funded a couple of days ago. It was a relatively high funding goal. And for a Kickstarter of mine, right? Obviously, there are board games and other games out there that are we'll fund it $100,000 and they get 2,000 people and it's no problem. This was a little different. We were publishing 5 books as part of this Kickstarter. And I try not to drop the hammer on the hard sell. I like the work to speak for itself. However, everyone who plays the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, everyone who is interested in hack and slash fantasy and has wanted to try GURPS but has been put off by the point value of the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game box set, which is pretty high, wants to play 0 to hero, or doesn't want to spend a lot of time making the character. This is the book for you. If you want to recruit your friends to play the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game and say, hey, I have this cool game, let's play today, like now, this is the book for you. And I have a small Patreon with about 45 or 50 people in it, and they've seen advanced copies of the books. One of them took it to their local game store, and they ran a walk-up game using the Powered by GURPS Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. Now, if you know GURPS, quick character generation is not really a thing. So this does it, and the typical time to make these characters usually ranges between 5 and 20 minutes. Excuse me. So this is really, really fast, and you can get to a functional, engaging, well-rounded, playable character with something like 6 decisions.
I think that's really helpful and important for the modern RPG to be able to do that. Like I just remember back in like 3.5 days, some like new person would come to the table and you're like, here, have this stack of books and come back, make a character for 2 hours and then come join us.
Right. And in terms of coming full circle, the old basic D&D was, roll dice 6 times, pick a class, pick a race, grab a sword, or if you're a cleric, a mace, because that's all you could do is hit them with the mace. And fifth edition has come back to that, where at its simplest, you don't even have to roll dice, although many people like doing it. You allocate the standard array, you pick a race and class, make a few decisions, grab an equipment kit, and start play. West End games, Star Wars, you allocated a few bits of dice, and back when I was in college, I brought 15 people through character generation with the West End game Star Wars D6 system in an hour, and we were playing, and none of those people had experience with the system, or some of them hadn't really role played before, but they liked the idea of Star Wars, and so it's a fantastic entry level system, and that kind of quick start is how you do recruiting, right? I mean, it's like the board games that you play where setup takes an hour and a half, and God forbid your cat jumps on the table, right? That's a game for people who are willing to do it, but it's not, hey, let me get you into my hobby, right? You go watch a movie while I set up the pieces, and you can almost do it. Some of the animated films are about 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
You go watch Moana or Zootopia while I set up whatever the game is, and so none of those things are conducive to quick start. Now, GURPS has fantastically flexible character generation, but when it's time to introduce people to the hobby, burying them in choices is not the right call.
I think sometimes as gamers and designers, like, we forget that aspect of it. Like we forget where we started, and the fact that, like, if we want the hobby to be successful, even if we want the new project we're doing to be successful, you constantly need new blood coming into it. So, like, accessibility is super important. Even like for 5e, one of the designers told me was they were at an event, and there was two kids that came up, and they looked at the people playing, and the one kid's like, wow, that looks like a lot of fun. They look like they're having fun. But the other kid says, yeah, but I bet it's really expensive. Look at all the books, right? And they were looking at all the stuff, and they were like overwhelmed, and it became this deterrent to getting into it. And like the rules that people really don't like about Adventures League, like, were spawned from like that, that observation of going, like, well, how do we keep people coming in and not scare them away? If every player is sitting next to a tower of books,
right?
And it doesn't. I'm talking about D&D, but it doesn't really matter what game you're talking about. You want entry to be easy.
That's right. And there's a famous meme / picture that was photoshopped together in the GURPS space with a stack of books fading off into infinity, and you've got you've got some real titles in there, but you've got like GURPS Asparagus and GURPS the world of nothing but shrimp, or whatever, and that is a deterrent to play. And I have to give Sean and the designers credit in 4th edition. Instead of, in order to play this game, you need to buy this supplemental material in order to do it right, most of the new world books are, this is how you refine the basic set you already have in order to play the genre. And that's GURPS as sculpture, in that you take away everything that is not your campaign, and then you start play. Now, that's still work for the game master and work for the player. And you don't really want to say, go away and come back with your character, because shared assumptions can break down. Now, what Sean did, and what Delvers to Grow, which is the current Kickstarter, does, is Sean took all the things that weren't hack and slash fantasy and threw them away and came up with the box set. And what Delvers to Grow did is say for people for whom 250-point characters, which are like 6th to 10th level 5th edition characters, multiple attacks, multiple options, you got a bunch of feats thrown in there. There's a lot you can do. For people who are new to the game, that's not good necessarily, because you can get into analysis paralysis. You can get into, but what do I do? And the poor new players staring there at the sheet, and they don't know that they need, in a D&D sense, it would be, they don't know that really you always want to use your sharpshooter feat or whatever, right? You've got these things that you're silly to not use. Yeah. No, really, spend your point of divine power for the paladin to smite evil, because on this particular creature it counts double, and they don't know that yet. And so it can be a suboptimal experience because they're not bringing their A game to the table because they don't know. So what Delvers to Grow does is it says, we're going to get an expert. We're going to get an expert to help steer down the center of the pathway there, and whittle it down in modules to make sure that that doesn't happen, but also to allow 62 point, 125 point, 187 point, which is a quarter, a half, and 3/4 of the power level of a starting Delver. That allows you to basically have the thing that you're good at, and you grow into the big list as you learn.
Yeah, I was just laughing at the comments. Brian Smith is just the mention of 250-point character has given me analysis paralysis.
Right. And while 250 points could theoretically be 250 individual decisions, most game masters and most players would beat people over the head with their basic set if they came with that. But it's chunkier than that. But even so, it's a lot of options that you could potentially do. And if you just want to play and get to the fun part, and there are people for whom the metagame of character generation is the fun part. But most people get off and really enjoy the actual play part. Role playing is a social activity. And goodness gracious, we all could use some more social activity these days.
Yeah, I mean, we create the characters in order to interact and use them in the game.
That's right.
I mean, there's a part of it that's fun as well. Tobar Step wants to know what's the difference between GURPS Dungeon Fantasy and Dungeon Fantasy powered by GURPS.
So that is a bit of sort of unfortunate overlap in naming. So you have the basic set, right, which is the basic books, and then you have 4 genre examples that require the basic set to play: Dungeon Fantasy, Monster Hunters, Action, and After the End. Okay, those are supplements and worked examples that build off the basic set. The powered by GURPS games, and I believe powered by GURPS started in 3rd edition with the World War II line and a few other things. I think Hellboy is a powered by GURPS product, Discworld, and the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. Next year, there will also be Mission X Alien Menace, which is a real gesture of good faith in my ability to make a complete role-playing game using the GURPS rules. But anyway, so the net of it is that powered by GURPS are standalone games where everything that you need to play is in the book or in the box.
And what is the difference between Dungeon Fantasy Trip?
The Fantasy Trip is the old and new, but the Fantasy Trip was one of Steve Jackson's first role-playing games that he designed when he was working for metagaming. And he lost the license to that when metagaming went under, and due to some vagaries of copyright law, he was able to reacquire the abandoned property not long ago. And the Fantasy Trip is this ginormous box set. It's also just a book and whatever, but they kickstarted it, and it had like 4,000 backers, and they produced this monster. It's not quite ogre big,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's big. It's this huge box set. And so the Fantasy Trip is a rules light tactical combat game onto which a role-playing game has been very successfully integrated. Um, so you've got Melee Wizard, that's the tactical battle game, and then In the Labyrinth, which is Melee Wizard, Advanced Wizard, and some role-playing elements, all in one piece. So it was a precursor to GURPS in a way. You can definitely see the lineage. After the Fantasy Trip went away, Steve wrote Man to Man, which was to GURPS what Melee was to the Fantasy Trip. And that evolved into the generic universal role-playing game, which brought us to 4th edition today.
So now the weather is, getting nicer, and I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but I'm kind of fascinated. You do some like Viking martial arts, and
I do.
and you also make shields.
I do. I make shields, and if you can see behind me, the training weapon is a Type 15 sword and buckler sword. I make the training weapons for the school that I go to. My instructor Arthur makes most of the shields, but I learned at his elbow. But yeah, when I was about to do my after 5th edition came out, I got into some really interesting conversations with Tim Shorts of Gothridge Manor, and he was expounding with great vigor on the short and long rest, right? So I was thinking about that and thinking about GURPS because I've been playing GURPS since 1989. Excuse me, take a drink here.
Sure thing.
Anyway, and I was thinking about that, but I was also thinking about shields at the time, because I always felt that a shield, which can be very, very large, should do better than +1 or +2 to armor class. And in Pathfinder, for example, it can. But it covers half in like the shield behind me is designed to cover half my body. Actually, it covers a great deal more than half my body if I have a proper position. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, well, that's all game theory relevant, and yay, and I could just write this rule, but I'd never used a shield. I had done years of Korean martial arts and other things, but I'd never really done historical European martial arts, and I'd never used a shield. And so I went looking around for schools in the Twin Cities, and I found Ostfolk, which is a historical Viking martial arts school that differentiates itself from reenactment because it tries to use equipment modeled off of actual period finds, which means that they're like the shields, for example. The shield behind me is 34.5 or 34 inches in diameter, but it's only 6 pounds. And that seems to be about the right weight for the shields that came out of the Gokstad ship or some of the other finds. They're very thin. They're faced and backed in hide or leather. There's some question about that, but right now we use rawhide. And it's used differently than I thought when it comes to dueling. When you line up in shield wall and stuff, that was kind of post Viking. That was by the time they were lining up in shield walls, they weren't Viking anymore. They were Normans. But in any case, long story less long, as I started to use a shield and learn some stuff, and then I wrote rules and eventually put those rules into my Dragon Heresy book, which is what happens when GURPS and 5th edition get really drunk at a con, and then 9 or 10 months later there's a surprise, because there's some lethality in there. There's some, I still wanted to keep it one roll hit, but I wanted to incorporate more skilled defense, and there's wounds versus vigor. I'm not the only person who has come up with the different short and long rests and stuff like that. I'm not the only person who's ever done that. I won't be the last, but it's a really nifty way of dealing with what I call the hit point problem,
Yeah.
which is higher level characters having so many hit points that it becomes a little head scratchy, because an axe to the neck really should finish anyone. And while you can and you're supposed to, ever since Dungeon Master's Guide, first AD&D, page 82, hit points aren't all blood and guts and viscera. However, ever since I've played D&D when I was 10, when you roll to hit, every single game master that I've played with and every player that I've played with has always said, "Oh, you hit and the bright blood flows."
Yeah.
And blah blah blah. So it's always been described that way. I've never had a game master said, "Yes, you wave your sword and he is uncomfortable and therefore he loses hit points," or he's a little scared and he loses hit points. All of which are supposed to, oh, he just barely gets out of the way thanks to his divine guidance or luck, and so he loses hit points. I've never heard it described that way, although I'm sure that there are people in the audience who do that.
Yeah.
At least
I try to occasionally, just because from the player side, not necessarily from the monster side, right? Because you can hack them up all day long.
Right, exactly. But what Dragon Heresy did is you have this pool of wounds. And when you lose wounds, you're cut, you're bludgeoned, you're bleeding, you're injured. When you lose vigor, and it's mechanically equivalent to hit points, but when you're losing vigor, you're basically you're successfully defending, you're getting out of the way, whatever. And the more skilled you are, the more vigor that you have. But the other thing is if you have a critical hit, if you are attacked unaware, vigor doesn't matter, and you go right to wounds, which means that even a 20th level barbarian with 24 strength and 24 con can be killed with a critical hit to the head. And there's also an abstract called shots rule that increases the critical threat range and blah blah blah. So, said 20th level barbarian has a maximum of 31 wounds, and that's enough to get splorched with a one hit. And that same barbarian is going to have the equivalent of 300, 400, 500 hit points because of resistance to whatever. So it gives you the choice. It's still a one roll thing. The higher level you get, the more that you have to exceed a basic threat DC before you actually bypass. You can actually throw a blow skillful enough to go right past hit points. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into it, but all of these things, to bring it back around to the powered by GURPS piece, all of these things are kind of natively in GURPS with the active defense rolls and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like the things that you mentioned, that's always been the case where everyone wants to describe it as like hits or you actually getting wounded. And I remember someone when 5e first came out, they're like, I don't like that you can get all your hit points back when you take a long rest.
That was precisely what Tim said in the conversation with that. He just thought that it was really weird that and a little bit hard to believe that a short rest or a long rest was like you've lost almost all your hit points, you've been in battle, you've theoretically been described as being wounded, and you get a kiss from your mom and the next day you're good to go again. And that gets to the abstraction versus description part of it, whereas in order to make the game exciting, you describe things in a visceral, blood-soaked way. Somebody cast a fireball at you, but no, it was just you take the soot off and you're good to go, right? You were only a little bit burned. You stake off the whatever, and that was his problem, was the cognitive dissonance that you get, the mismatch between the narration and the mechanics that you can get in situations like that, and that's why I did the wounds and vigor thing.
I think Starfinder implemented something similar as well, where you have two different types of health, but the thing was, like, the same person is like, well, only magical healing makes sense and is realistic. But I'm like, is it really realistic to get shot 20 times with arrows and be like still alive? Like, how many times can you really get stabbed with a sword or a spear?
Right. Well, the apparently quite a few, because some of the finds of wounded people in
Yeah.
in like the battle at Visby, I think, have a remarkable number of wounds that were very clearly remodeled. So they had been wounded over and over again and come back from it. The other thing is there are cases where people get shot 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 times. And
live,
it's
yeah.
unusual, but when you're role playing an action hero game, you are by definition an unusual person.
But they're
That
probably
being
not
said,
still fighting either, though.
yeah, there's that is true. That being said, the expectation of getting
Yeah.
bashed and slashed and whatever is badness, and you want to meet your players' expectations for that, so that and actually the converse as well. I remember playing a D6 Star Wars game where I shot a stormtrooper with a blaster, and he didn't just drop. I'm like, what do you mean he didn't just drop? This was stormtrooper armor is useless. It just covers their face. If you shoot a stormtrooper in the shoulder with a blaster, they go ah, and then you get the Wilhelm scream and they die. Well, what do you mean he's shooting back? He can't do that. So it works both ways.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm gonna jump into the chat. There was a couple of questions. Brian wants to know, are there cool settings or creatures specific to the fantasy RPG?
So, I think the dungeon fantasy role-playing game by itself is a framework. I have published now 7 books, 6 of which are specifically setting material or setting boosters, 4 adventures, 2 character generation aids, and then there's Fantastic Dungeon Grappling, which is, I like to write grappling rules. But yeah, the you got the Viking shield behind me, and one of the reasons I got into that was the original playtest of the Dragon Heresy system. My friend and collaborator Peter Lil Orto says, I want to play a cleric. What gods do I worship? And I had just seen Thor, the Marvel movie. Yeah. And I'm like, well, let's do Norse. We'll just do Norse. It's easy. People know it. Yay, Thor. So he was a cleric of Thor. And then the more that I looked into it, the more that I looked into Norse mythology.
I thought you were going to go with God of Hammers, culture. But
Yeah, no. But the more that I looked into it, the more that I was like, oh my goodness, these guys are the OG role-playing party, right? In the fictional presentation of the Vikings and stuff, they were the ones who girded up and they bought a ship or went to a patron and said, hey, we want to go over to England and kill people and take their stuff. And so the noble said, yeah, sure, I'll sponsor you. And they would go out and kill people and take their stuff and come back and get fame and fortune for it, which pretty much sounds like every D&D adventure almost ever. Yeah. And then you read the mythology and you got dragons, and the more valor you have, and then there's the culture of wearing your wealth and blah blah blah, and some of it's fictionalized and some of it isn't, and some of it comes from sagas which were not contemporaneous with the thing. But in any case, long story less long, is I was like, this is a great setting. I mean, the culture is a great setting, and so I plunked it down in a fictional land called Eterra or Nordland in the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game, and started doing stuff with the setting. And one of the reasons I like Citadel at Nordvorn, my adventure book here, is Citadel sets up a really nice base of operations that happens to be adjacent to an area that is incredibly suitable for a hex crawl. And Crypt of Krysavik, the adventure that is part of the Kickstarter, Delvish to Grow, that's running right now, is a 125 point beginning with a hex crawl. And there's a hex crawl map, and there's a 10-mile hex, and the details of that are there, and there's a quest and stuff. But Nordvorn is not an adventure. It's a mini setting, and it has several different towns and NPCs, and they all have interactions with each other that are described in this relationship map, which when, if you interact with somebody and they have a red line to somebody else, it means that that's a hostile relationship. And so I've interacted with this guy and this other guy or this other woman is hostile, and so by being friendly to this person, I'm annoying at least, or making an enemy at best from the game master perspective. And so now you have a hostile relationship there, or you've got other people who will be your friends. And I've used the relationship map and the setting to run pickup games that last for many, many sessions. You don't need a lot of prep when the players make things hard on themselves, which they always do. And the other part of it is that I really like, as part of this and all these setting containing books, the festivals and stuff that I have in there that allow you to, because in medieval times, you'd have like 60 festivals a year. Some of them were really big festivals, some of them were, small celebrations, but about every week there was something going on. And a festival is a great way to show, not tell, the values, culture, importance, plot seeds, etc. Because in these villages, which are 300, 400, 500 people, or even in this big town, which might be 10 or 15,000, that whatever the big thing is, people are going to be talking about it. Because the thing about people is we never shut up. Right? So you're going to be walking around and you're going to hear the rumors and you're going to interact, and maybe you get to meet some of these NPCs and blah, blah, blah. And it really is a great way of introducing people to a setting like this, and a deep setting like this, even if I say so myself. It's a great way of introducing to a setting like this without having to sit back and have the game master read 5 pages of exposition, or to email out that setting book that no one's going to read. But I worked so hard on it. Nobody cares. Right? So sorry, but nobody cares. Right? And so there's a great question on that I want to come back around. But the setting allows you to interact, and it's a microcosm of Viking culture, but there are other cultures surrounding. So if you want to play the classic, totally not Asian monk, or the totally not Egyptian catfolk, or the totally not Celtic bard, you can do that and just say you're from far away. And there's a question from Brian, who seems to be the straight man on the question, which I love. He's like, so what does 125 points even mean? It's a great question. Points are the currency of which that you build characters. But what it means is that a 125 point character is usually good enough at something that they've got a good chance, like fighting or magic or whatever, they've got a good chance of doing what it is that they're best at every time. If you're a 250 point character, you can usually do what you're best at in very adverse conditions, or multiple times. I'm going to kill you with a sword twice, or I'm going to hit you with a sword once, or an arrow once through the eye at long range. That's your super action hero thing. 125, which is half that level, you're really talking about like 3rd or 4th level D&D feel. You're good enough that you have a niche. You're experienced at it, but you're not so good that you can casually dismiss threats like a pack of wolves or a group of orcs or whatever the equivalent is. You have to worry, you have to make good decisions, etc. So at 250 points, you can, not always, but many times, especially against kind of mookish, low value, low threat, you can wade into the fray and just bam, and kill them all, and it's just a matter of their speed bump. But at half of that level, and half of that, even if you're playing 62s, 25% of your action hero level. 62 point is a talented normal. 125 is like an expert, and a 250 is an action hero.
So it sounds like in D&D terms, because a lot of my audience plays D&D,
yeah, absolutely,
is like 62 is your first level character, and the 125 is you've just gotten your subclass, and you do the thing now. You also mentioned like a really good point for that's great for GMs and players, and that's in like how you introduce them to your world. I love the festival idea because they show up into a town, they're clearly strangers and not from that town. So people are probably going to ask, are you here for the thing, right? And they're going to be like, the normal response to that is, well, what's that? Right. And now, anytime you can get the players to actually seek out the information, it is so much better than just dumping it on them.
And that is true, because and not only is it true of the setting, it also happens to be true of the mechanics, because one of the things about medieval fantasy festivals and stuff, at least as they're presented, is there's always combat sports that happen in the background. There's the wrestling match, the quarterstaff match, the archery contest. I mean, how many Robin Hood stories or Brave with Merida or is there the archery contest, right? So it gives and then in the setting, there's this basically skaldic rap battles. It's called flighting. I used to pronounce it fleeting, but apparently that's not right. But it's basically an insult contest, and it features in some of the poetic and prose eddas. And it's a skaldic rap battle. It's supposedly in verse, and it's thy mother sucks, and well, you ran away from a battle long ago, and blah blah blah. And the more renowned of the person that you're trying to have an insult battle is, the better the burn needs to be in order to make them say, you got me, let's buy ourselves a drink. So there's all kinds of different things other than I hit him with my mace, right? The one avenue to introduce people to the culture, and that you're trying to emulate.
Yeah, people always like want to know as DMs, like, how, why do my players not seem to care? And it's because you didn't make it about them. With the instant you can make it about them, and then in turn, like, they start asking the questions, and you can convey the information. Everything should be interactive. It's an RPG game, and it's cooperative.
That is correct. And not only that, but let's actually tie that into yet another question from Brian, which is, and I swear he's not like my straight man. I don't know who he is, but he's asking great questions.
Brian's actually a regular here. So.
All right. So I like him. Bring him back. But he's asking, what can an adventure writer do to make sure that their product is good and worth selling? And
that's DM Guru too, I believe.
My bad. You're right.
I was going to get to that when I found the break.
No, it's a great question, and I think that the one word answer, which ties into what we've been talking about, is agency. Make it so that the players are driving and calling the shots, and make sure that, I think that you need to be presenting situations, not solutions, because the players mostly will come up with things that you didn't think of, and that's well and good. They will signal to you how they want their game to go. Beyond that, make it readable, make it cross-referenced, make it easy to run without having to read it 12 times first. Use good layout, use art to tell the story a little bit if you can. There's great stock art out there. You don't have to spend, $300 a page or $300 a spread to fill a 128-page book with art. You can do it for a lot less, and these are very talented artists. It won't be, this is art that you have that no one else has, but if you're just getting into it, that's okay. I've seen Phil Reed, from when he does his own thing, I think he's got Battle Grip Games, gets inspired by stock art, and then he will write ideas around that stock art, his 12 rumors or this, that, the other thing. And anytime that he launches a Kickstarter, he's got like 2,000 freaking backers, right? And it's good stuff that is evocative and gives you idea seeds. But he's not going out and commission. He could, but he's not going out and commissioning unique art for everything. He's coming forward with ideas to the table, and people are responding to it. And honestly, if I could draw 1,500 or 2,000 backers per these projects, there is nothing that I could not do. 300-page full color hardback, I could do it. Right? It's just, once you get past that 1,000 and into that 1,500, 2,000 people who are buying your stuff, life becomes real possible in terms of.
How did you get started? Like, what was kind of your pathway in?
So I really wanted to bring Dragon Heresy to market. And I consulted, I wrote the book and did my thing, and I had 400,000 words written. That was going to be a giant 3-volume set. And the
I'm just thinking of the feedback you got when you presented that.
no, that's exactly right. And I went to I people are looking at it like, oh, this is pretty good, but you really ought to talk to this guy, because he's so good at this, and all of his Kickstarters get 1 million backers, and he raises all kinds of money and blah blah blah, and he's just been so good at this. And this is back before everyone and their brother did Kickstarter. So I sent a note, and he writes back. He's like, I really don't even want to say, because the answer here is, this is a terrible plan, right? You're going to market with your very first Kickstarter with a book that really ought to require well over $150,000 to do right. And you don't have a track record of doing this at all. Yeah. Okay. You've written some articles in a magazine that somebody else published. You've been a blogger. Woo! You and everybody else has been a blogger. This is too big to bite off, and you're going to fail, and you're going to fail hard. Well, the thing about asking an expert is that if they're giving you that advice, then you better listen to it. And so I was like, all right, deep breath. What do I do? And he's like, all right, you're actually going to listen. Let's talk. And he's like, what in this is small and unique? And I've got my grappling system, and I've got this thing that I borrowed with permission from another writer, that was a derivation of the Adventure Conquer King system that was out there for OGL and to do kind of the realm game. And he's like, well, I really like that. I'm like, yeah, but it's somebody else's. If someone else is going to, if they're going to do 5th edition version of that, I don't want to do that. So let me do the grappling thing. That's my thing. So I did dungeon grappling, which is my pitch to that in conventions is the first rules for D&D grappling that don't suck. And it's a low bar, but I'll stand by it. And it basically, that was my intro to getting started. It has OSR, Pathfinder, and 5th edition rules in it, which was a mistake. In retrospect. People want to buy what they want to buy. If you have someone who plays all 3 games, that's great. But many people just play one of those or one of them at a time. And so you don't do a 50-page book when 3 16-page books will do. And there are many reasons for that. But had I done it over again, I would have maybe done it a little differently.
Oh man, we all learn those lessons the hard way. The other thing too, like DM Guru too is asking about collabing and talking to people, I believe. So one of the things you should do is just try and get involved with communities, go to events like conventions and talk to people, and also be genuine and you really need to care about what the other person is doing and talking to them, and not just be like, well, what can I get out of this? Right.
Because and I think comes through. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it does come through. And I think the other thing is, I've been on a couple of panels now. I was at one at Gen Con, even on advice. And the thing that is always funny is there's always the person who asks the question, well, how do I collaborate with people without them stealing my idea? And let me tell you, I have enough ideas and plans for 3 years worth of work. I don't want your idea. I don't need your idea. And this is me. I'm not like super artsy, creative, wow, off the wall, I'm doing something unique guy. I'm hack and slash role playing guy. I'm I'm not exactly doing avant-garde here. I'm trying to make it fun. I'm trying to put projects together that are on time, on budget, and let you run your game your way. Nobody cares about your idea. They have ideas of their own. Yeah. And so don't worry about that. What they care about is on time, on budget, playable, and something that they can read. So if I'm going to give advice about how to make your stuff stand out, be a great partner, be a great planner, and understand what you're getting into when it's making a game, because the work starts when the ideas stop, not the other way around, right? It's like that old line about when I'm talking about writing, it's the rewriting that is really the thing.
Yeah.
Go through, I don't want to use Dragon Heresy as an example, but I also don't want to get up because we're running out of time. Go through 10 professionally published big dog RPG books. Go through a Pelgrane book, a WotC book, a Paizo book, Steve Jackson Games book, Games Workshop, whatever, right? Go through the title page of these books and look at the credits page. Somebody got paid for every single name that appears on the credits. And if somebody paid for it and put it on the front cover of your book, you need to realize why it's important and assess whether or not you can do that job. And the answer is likely no. And I don't mean that in a bad way, right? Just you got to really think, can I be an art director? Now, I draw stick figures, but I'm a pretty good art director, so tell my artists, mostly because I say, here's my stick figures. You tell me, artist person, what the best way to do this is, and then I listen. But I'm not an artist. My art would be awful, right? I mean, Order of the Stick makes me look good. Of course, Order of the Stick is pretty fun. So, right. But that's the thing, is you really need to figure out what you're good at. I'm a trained project manager, and I'm a trained team builder. That's my skill set. I was a consultant. I was a technology manager. Bringing a book to life is easy relative to trying to figure out a 15 angstrom coating to keep your data safe on a spinning hard disk, right? That's easy. The physics for the second one usually don't exist. People know how to publish books. Doing it on time, on budget, readable, getting all of that done, getting it to people. Oh my God, shipping is insane. And you need to understand where the roadblocks are on getting from idea to book in hand. And once you have a track record for doing that, people have been very forgiving. People will be very forgiving when reality happens. You have to understand the regulatory environment. If you want to sell a miniature or a counter, right? If you want to, that's a Steve Jackson Games thing. Now, if you want to take this deck of cards and ship it to Europe, you can't, right? It's just not something you can do unless it's a printed product like a book, in which case that's not a problem, it's exempt. But things that kids might get their hands on are supposed to carry the CE mark and have safety testing, and that's thousands of dollars and a real pain in my butt. Trust me, I've just been struggling this with 6 weeks, right? And the way that they want you to do it is make it first, send it for testing, and when they give you corrective action, you have to make it again. No one, WotC can do that. No one else can, right? And so, but you really need to understand the landscape of what you're doing, and most of the work is not creative. The work that is creative, you need to make sure that you're good at it, or you hire people who are. And my last thing, as we run down for the last 5 minutes, is you need an editor. If you're an editor, then hire an author. If you're an author, hire an editor. But you can't. Some people try and edit their own stuff. Some people scrape by, but everyone needs an editor.
Yeah, I mean, we can run a little over. It's not that huge as long as you're good.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, to that, we have someone that we hired on who used to do newspaper layout, and their background is in journalism as well as layout and editing. And on our project, they worked a lot on the creative end as well. So at the end of it, even though they did all the editing, I then went and sent it to a proofreader, right?
Absolutely.
Because they touched it too much for me to feel confident that not in their ability, but they weren't removed enough.
And it's not a slam on anybody, right? I'm on like the fifth to seventh revision of the Delver Segura manuscript. It's laid out. I'm ready to go to art direction. I do things a little backwards. I do, or at least for me, a lot of other games companies that I've seen do, they get the art and then they lay out around it. I do the other thing. I send the spread to the artist and say, fill this space. And this is what's on it. So here are a couple options for what you do. Anyway, I now read in this manuscript what I want to see.
Yeah.
Right? I skip over the fact that that sentence ends with a slash because I fat fingered. Right? And I got the front slash instead of a period. I just glance over that. And once you go to print, it's a little late.
Yeah, that's it. It's out. Yeah.
You know?
Also, too, like you brought up a really good point about, you know, someone asking that question, worry about someone's going to steal your idea. Now, you know, even internally with products that we have, like, you know, we have people on our team that are very concerned about that happening. And I go, we can play whack-a-mole all day long, or we can put out the next product. Right. And you're never going to win whack-a-mole.
You're never going to win whack-a-mole. And there's that stupid, I think it's hosted in Russia site, that's the archive for all RPGs that pirates things almost before that they're published. There's nothing you can do about that. And honestly, from what I've seen, there are about as many people who want the opportunity to page through a book, whether digitally or in front of them, before they plunk down their money. And so I would never encourage that. But every now and then it does result in a sale. I mean, it sucks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no one wants their ideas stolen. I think the thing that drives that is that movies always seem to come out in twos. There was Dangerous Liaisons and Valmont, for example, that came out within a year of each other, probably because a writer was shopping around a script. And the deal didn't work out, but it's, you know, close enough and stuff like that. So in Hollywood, when you've got millions or billions of dollars at stake, I suspect keeping it internal so you can borrow a concept and oh, well, you know, I was reading the script the other day about this really cool thing about French politics and culture, whatever. That's not really how it works in our industry, I don't think.
Yeah.
It's too distributed. And it doesn't, the barrier to entry is lower than ever. So you don't, so the barrier to entry of quality is not lower than ever. The barrier to entry is lower because the tools that are available to you are amazing.
Yeah. You're better off thinking about branding over everything else. So this way, at least when your stuff does get stolen, at least it's advertising for you.
Right. So, and, you know, and I don't want to whine, or complain, but I am going to beg or plea, because the book that I'm doing right now is the best recruiting tool for powered by GURPS gaming that has ever been written. Everyone who has ever thought, gee, I might want to try GURPS should want this book. And it's so good. And I didn't write it. Kevin Smith wrote it, and he wrote Nordlander Folk in My Hand of Asgard book, and he has done a masterful job of charting the course down the core tropes and abilities that you're going to want. And if you want someone to play your game and play it right now, you want this book. And there's going to be 3 books of examples to inspire people, and an adventure that you can just play right then. You can go from, hey, I heard about this role-playing thing, I'd like to try that, to, okay, here's a character and a thing, and now we're playing in like 30 minutes to an hour. We did a test run, and this is the nice thing about doing blind testing, is I had enough of the manuscript done and laid out that I was able to give it to my patrons, and one of them did what we call blind testing. There's play testing, which usually involves the creators, but there's blind testing, which is hands off, take this thing and go use it. And I'm not going to tell you how, I'm not even going to watch. And they did, and they ran what we call the meat grinder, which is like a DCC funnel using GURPS. So it was designed to kill characters. Well, when you have a point build system and your character dies, sometimes you go away for a week to come back with a new one. It's what my Merlin Avery, who wrote Forest End, the one of the adventures in my Nordland setting, he has a phrase that he likes to use called save or spectate. Right, save or die. But really, if your character's not dead but they're incapacitated, you're a spectator for the rest of that 3-hour session if the combats run long or whatever. So save or spectate, and that's something you don't necessarily want to happen. Well, the goal here was to see if someone could have a character die, and by the time their turn came around, they have a new paper man and they're ready to play, and they could. So you didn't even miss a turn. Sometimes you might miss one, but mostly you didn't even miss a turn because you got 4 other players and a game master who's controlling all the bad guys. So that's usually a minimum of 5 or 10 minutes to come back around, right? A minute to what you're going to do and to revise it and, pass the pizza or whatever. So the concept of running a DCC funnel or to bring fast to the table now exists, and it's a different kind of game. It enables walk-up games at your favorite local gaming store. It enables convention play where you're not required to hand out pre-gens, although I strongly recommend handing out pre-gens. But it's something where it's like, hey, you've got 15 minutes. We have a 4-hour session. You've got 15 minutes to make a character. And that's more than enough time as long as you're not trying to make a psychic fruit bat or something, right? Where you're way off into weirdness land. But if you've got a tightly focused game, and convention games tend to be tightly focused, you can have a setup like this and be playing in 15 minutes. Shay Webster of Roleplay Rescue Podcast we've interacted a few times, and like Nerdarchy and Gaming Blitzik have interacted a few times. I sent him a draft, and he said that he had a character ready in 14 minutes, including reading the book the first time. So, nice. I mean, that's pretty good. If you've never role played before and you don't know the tropes, maybe it'll take a little longer, because what's a hit point, right? You get to, or what's a character, right? All right, that might take a little longer, but that's not the book's fault. Right? It's
you must have been living under a rock. I feel like even if you don't know what RPGs are and the tropes, like video games are pretty prolific.
And actually, that was another comment we got, which was this book. A player who was so on familiarity with GURPS and role playing, but he played a lot of CCRPGs. I'm sorry, not CCRPGs, because that's a collectible card game. Computer RPGs. He played a lot of computer RPGs. He said this generation system is as fast as making a character on the computer, like for a role playing game where you have to pick an element or whatever. So, I mean, Kevin did. I mean, I wrote a post about this in 2015 about what GURPS and Powered by GURPS needs to recruit and to build the number of players back to sort of mid-90s level, where you could always sell thousands or tens of thousands of copies of a book. And I've been harping on this, and now that I'm a publisher, I got asked permission to do it, and thanks to Steve Jackson Games for saying yes. But this is it. This is the recruiting tool that people have been waiting for. Delvers to Grow on Kickstarter. We funded a few days ago. I would like to spend a few minutes to talk about the stretch goals.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I do stretch goals a little differently after my last campaign. Stretch goals are strictly by backer count. It's not funding level. It's how many people come. And the reasons for that have under the waterline stuff. But if we hit 600, 750, I think there's anyway, I think the last one's at 1,000 or thereabouts. But if we hit that, I'm guaranteed to completely have the money to make a great PDF. And if I can make the PDF, then all the physical stuff is not moving money around unsuccessfully. But what it means is that a $35 PDF pledge or a $300 I Want It All pledge both contribute equally to meeting the next stretch goal. So while I would love for 300 people to come in and pledge $300, I don't need that in order to get to the next stretch goal. And the next stretch goal is a book that is very similar to my character collections book called Bandits and Outlaws. So using the Delvers to Grow framework, I will create a book of ready to play non-player characters with personality and completely kitted out and motivations and goals and all that stuff, so that you can just be like, oh, well, here's 3 bandits. And rather than play 3 clones that are exactly the same, and they all have stormtrooper helmets on because they're exactly the same, you have motivation and goals, and this person is going to fight to the death if you do this, or run away if you do that, or this is their motivation, or this is their surrounding, or this is a person who doesn't have a lot of combat skills, but they're a con artist. And to bring those, and I've got 72 characters, and they'll have art. Everyone will be illustrated. But that's the stretch goal at 600 people. And then there's another one with spellcasters, and who doesn't need ready to go spellcasters? Picking spell lists is a pain, right? And so this will be a book of that. And then the last one, which I really want to get to, but we got some work to get to 1,000 backers, is Pirates and Vikings. And the key about that is what it is it's 4 ships: a long ship, a merchant vessel, and 2 small pirate vessels. Because yes, Pirates of the Caribbean had this full-on double-decker sailing ship or whatever, or frigate, a single-decker frigate. But most pirate ships are like they are, you see in Somalia, fleets of small vessels, so that you can't take one out, and the boats are expensive. Ships are expensive, and so they swarm you rather than come in one ship with cannon fire. But 4 ships, each with complete crews with unique personalities. So it's not just, oh, here's a ship and here's 26 clone Vikings. It's here's the captain, and here's the windfinder, the druid, which controls the weather so that you can never escape. And here's this guy who likes a spear, and here's Stubby Dave, who's missing a leg, but he fights anyway, and whatever, right? So that's a book that I really want to do, but it's out there a little bit for stretch goals. But it's the kind of thing where the more people who come to, it's obvious, and most things in business are, but the more people who come to the table on this, the more that I can do, and not just the more that I can do empowered by GURPS, the more that I can do, period. And so, for me right now, my biggest goal is to just get the word out that Gaming Ballistic is here, with things in hand, and that if you're looking to do powered by GURPS, or you want a Viking experience in 5th edition, then we got you covered.
You can check those all out in the links in the description, as always. So final thoughts before we head out?
Yeah, those were my final thoughts. The Delvers to Grow is the recruiting tool that you need. It allows 0 to hero play for the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game. Kevin has done a fantastic job, and I cannot wait to get this to the artists, because it's really going to come alive. 6 decisions to play, 3 books of worked examples, and a great adventure that can be easily ported to other games if you really want. And if you don't, one day I probably will anyway. So but it's a fun campaign. It's funded. There's no risk here in terms of, oh, maybe it won't show up. This is my 11th Kickstarter. I've funded and delivered every one. And it's time to get this done.
Nice. Well, thanks for coming on and chatting with us today. Until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.